discussion on discipline and working within constructs of discipline for kids, especially who have had histories of trauma and difficult circumstances that might change how they engage with discipline, but also just working with discipline with children who are strong-willed and children who can be more difficult based on other things like personality and preference. So in this episode, we're going to talk about very practical approaches to discipline. And we thought it might be fun to do some scenario-based approaches. And so I thought we could open it up and maybe get some stories along the lines of what we've experienced before, general stories that you've heard from other parents, things that you're dealing with, and maybe walk through questions that remain when you have difficult discipline situations. Does that sound good to you guys?
I'll start with the one everybody has. My kid is the screaming kid in Walmart. What do I do? Every kid with trauma has had that. Every parent has had that.
Absolutely. Man, and isn't that super stressful? My kids weren't the screamers in Walmart, but my kids were the ones that were everywhere, turning, touching, grabbing, all the things, two at once, fighting, whatever. And I would watch other parents with their kids walking behind them. And I'm like, what do you do? Like, are you hypnotize them before you come into the store? Or what is going on here? But it's really difficult because, again, before we even start on disciplining the child, because there's a lot of reasons why a kid might be screaming in Walmart, why your kid might be screaming in Walmart. What's the thing that's really pushing on? When a kid is screaming and I'm flooding because I can't get my kid to quit screaming in Walmart, what's really going on inside of me?
I'm feeling embarrassed.
Yeah.
And that's why I don't care. And I don't care, but people actually give you funny looks. Mm-hmm. If my 4-year-old is screaming, I'll push the cart just far enough away that she can't hit or kick me. And I'll just say, we'll chill. We're going to chill here until you're ready to go on and I'm ready to go on. And other people give you weird looks for that, but it seems to calm down the situation in my world.
Absolutely. And that's that's a great example of a really good thing to do. And to build our own internal strength, to reroute our own minds that go to places of embarrassment when something like that is happening, because we're not doing it. We're not the ones kicking and screaming, right? But somehow we automatically assign the value of our child kicking and screaming to ourselves. And we begin to make things up in our heads. Interpretation and embarrassment comes from what we call meaning making, which means we look at a situation and we ascribe meaning to it. We're always making it up because no one is really saying anything. They may be looking certain ways. But the truth is we owe nobody explanations for anything. And we have more, bigger things in front of us to deal with, like our kid who just was placed with me and has had trauma history. We don't know why they're screaming, but it's more important that I connect to them than that all these other people think I'm a good parent, because they have no idea what's happening in my life, right? So I highly suggest for that, sometimes counseling and maybe some cognitive restructuring. You can do counseling work to reprogram your brain to think different things in situations like that. It's pretty brilliant, and it's neuroscience guided things. There's some basic cognitive restructuring processes if you need something at that level, but otherwise to talk to other friends who have difficult kids in stores and to have them say things like Stacy said of, I just push them away and let them go, because hearing that someone else does that gives us permission to do that. Now, a second thing that I would say is for discipline, because again, when we talk about discipline, we're talking about long-term change, not punishment, but long-term change. Start digging into, why is my kid screaming in Walmart? Stacy, would you like to add something to that?
I was going to add that I have almost fixed the screaming in Walmart problem. I've come very close to fixing it. And that is before we go in Walmart or before we go in the grocery store, we talk about our behavior, how we're going to behave. And then I let them know that they're allowed to pick out, because the screaming is all about, I want this, I want that. They're allowed to pick out one thing as we go through that's not candy and not a toy, but they pick out one thing that they want. And my kids will pick something in the first aisle and then they'll put it back. And then we'll, by the end of the trip, we'll have a completely different item. But since we've been doing that, it's gone a lot smoother. And I don't really care if they happen to buy one package of cookies.
There you go. Right. And so being practical with yourself and creating practical solutions for yourself, if you find what works for your kid, you do that, right? and you give yourself permission to do that. You don't have to do it the way that other people do it. Another place to go, especially if that's not a fix for it, if it's just the wanting, sometimes there's a lot of stuff that comes with overstimulation in places like Walmart, because Walmart is designed to grab attention, to pull attention in multiple directions, and to make people want things. And these are psychological principles and concepts around them, and they are flooded and overwhelmed in stores. And so there are a few things that can happen. One, I highly suggest grocery pickup for parents. Pick up the groceries, don't go in unless you're by yourself, right? But also what I would do with my kids before grocery pickup was a really big thing. There's also a lot of body movements that you can do to regulate your kids before they go in and to get them in a more regulated place. And so you can look up or work with a lot of counselors, and a lot of occupational therapists have little exercises you can do that shift across their midline, help them to get some different juices flowing. And so we would do 10 turns in circles, and I would have them push the walls for 10 or 15 seconds before we went in, almost like a push-up, pushing against. And it's deep proprioceptive and vestibular muscle and perception rerouting. And it would give me about 25 minutes without it being crazy. Then they would start dysregulating again. And so I had to make sure I went in 25-minute blocks too. And so that was some of the ways that we did it. If you get curious about it rather than overwhelmed, if you give yourself permission to get curious, Stacy, you said you figured out a way to handle it, or you can look at it in a different direction. Ask people, what do you do about this? And be open, be honest about what's going on. You get a lot more options, right?
Well, and what both of you just said is that when you got curious and kind of figured out what was going on, whether it was overstimulation or the wanting or the whatever, that allowed you to be proactive before you went into the store to kind of come up with strategies that worked ahead of time to head that off.
I have found in life that, especially with kids with trauma, kids who've been pulled from their home by CPS, if you tell them what you are going to do before you do it, it makes life a lot better, because they are scared of uncertainty. Anybody is scared of uncertainty. Everybody hates uncertainty. Everybody hates just being randomly pulled one direction or another. And so if you tell them what the plan is before you go there, it always goes smoother. Absolutely. And if you tell them what the expectations are, like before we go into this restaurant, we're going to sit down at the table. We're going to have a nice meal. If you're good after the nice meal, I like to call it rewarding. We can get a gumball from the gumball machine. You know, this is clearly what I expect you to do when we're in there, because a lot of these kids haven't had these experiences before. And this is how I expect you to behave. And we'll have hiccups as it goes. But if we come back to the reminder of, we talked about this, then they're coming back to a frame set they know versus just oh my God, what do I do? You know, like ordering off a menu is a scary thing for a lot of foster kids.
Yes. And if your kid has sensory overload in any capacity, looking at a menu and trying to choose something feels like the biggest task that they've been asked to do all day sometimes. And so narrowing choices even, or having them look at a menu before you go. There's so many things that we can do preventatively in choosing food before they go and asking only to bring 2 menus to the table, right? So our kids aren't looking at the menus and, you know, getting overwhelmed and then frustrating us as well. So many things on the front end. I love that. And Stacy, preparing them, biggest game changer. And like you said, it's everybody. All kids do better with that too. Not just
I do better when I know what's going to happen.
Right?
Like if I would show up at work and every day I showed up at work, my boss would have a different task for me, and I was never able to plan my schedule. That would frustrate the heck out of me.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I remember go ahead, Dean. Sorry.
Oh no, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, I remember being a teenager, and I would come up with this plan on the way home from school on the bus. I'm going to do this homework and call this friend and do this other thing. And then I'd get home and my parents would say, you need to mow the lawn today, which was like a 3-hour thing, you know, and that totally screwed up my whole plan. And so I finally sat my parents down and said, all right, I want you to give me a schedule for how often you want these things done, because then I can work it into my plan rather than having you derail my plans. So I think that planning piece is helpful.
So helpful. And especially when you've empowered your kids and given them language for what they need and asking for how to rearrange stuff even, right? That's awesome. And that right there, even just prepping kids and telling them that they can do those things with us too, that they can ask us for rearrange it. rearrangements and for doing things differently and asking for things to be different and providing those conversations for them. We're having issues with going into the stores. We need ways to be better. What are some things that will work? Asking your kids to give you the answers in non-emotional times is, I mean, it's miraculous. So we do couples therapy even.
And kind of on that same trend, this is an issue that strictly arises with regards to foster kids is visits with their parents. They get canceled, they get moved. If you tell them about it, ahead of time, they're going to get canceled and moved, and they're going to be upset. If you don't tell them about it ahead of time, they're going to be upset. It's a very tough issue. Like, we had promised my 2-year-old, my 3-year-old, a visit with her mother, and because she had been denied one, the visit supervisor promised her she was coming to get her the next day to take her for the visit, and then the mom's facility got COVID. And
she can't understand that.
No. And so we had a night full of tantrums, which was to be expected. But this is a really hard question, but how do you prepare them for the uncertainty of foster care?
Yeah, you can't.
And how do you prepare the parents for the uncertainty of foster care too? Because it was kind of funny. I was telling my home finder, they should really start Pride with the saying, you have to be prepared for your plans to be canceled. Because you can't plan for anything in foster care. Like, you never know what's going to happen.
So one of the things, and this is a conversation that we go into a lot in terms of both discipline and just with family structures with foster care and adoption, is that this is our natural question because we know that planning and making preparations helps, right? But the truth is you cannot prepare kids for, in a way that disappointment and a biological parent not showing up is not going to hurt, is not going to completely throw them off. It'd be like me saying, like us as adults, I always like to pull it out and put it in a different frame. If we said, okay, let's figure out a way to train all parents so that they're not in like crazy, ridiculous grief if one of their kids dies. we go, what are you talking about? This ain't a thing. You just can't prepare enough for grief to not happen when things are being lost. And when a child has been removed from a parent and they're not showing up for visits or things don't happen the way that they are, you're not dealing with a tantrum because they're not getting what they want. We're dealing with grief. And sometimes, again, rerouting our understanding of what we're dealing with is quite a bit different too, because there's no way that we would walk into a parent who's lost their child, who is wailing in their bed with deep grief and say, get up, you have stuff to do. You know, I know that this hasn't gone how you wanted it to go, but you know, we still have to keep moving. And this is the way that it's going to be. We would engage differently. We may even still help them to move forward in certain ways, but the way we would do it is different through a lens of grief versus defiance, right? And so sometimes it's elevating our understanding of, if this was a grown-up situation, what would that look like? And making ourselves wrap our brains around it in a different way. And then moving back into the kid land and connecting as a kid, because kids don't connect like adults either. And so it's this back and forth, but helping reroute that in certain ways. So for kids in foster care, we can't prepare them for things to go wrong. What we can do is give them a model for what it looks like to have a safe home where when things go wrong, you're cared for, you are not allowed to self-destruct, but you are cared for, you're connected to, and you're given the right amount of space along with encouragement and guidance and even boundaries in how to grieve well. We also wouldn't sit back and go, hey, you're a mom who's lost a kid and you have 3 other kids. Totally fine if you do drugs for a while. Anybody would want to escape from this. No, we wouldn't do that either. We would say, you have more to live for. You have more to do. We would encourage or engage in that in a different way. And when we take that mindset with our kids, it shifts even how we engage in the moment with them.
And so what that requires is for us as parents to prepare to have our plans canceled and to prepare to manage their grief and to look at the kid who's tantruming or who's, you know, seemingly having this fit and go, oh, it's because they're grieving. It's because they're, you know, and to be ready for that to happen as opposed to reacting to it as though it's defiance.
Yep. I like to call it metabolize. We learn to metabolize their big feelings. They're throwing them at us. They don't know how to metabolize them. But if we can take them in and hold them in and we can work them out a different way without throwing them back, then we contain it for them and we show them what it's like to be contained and have containment in a space that feels very safe.
And something practical that I do in a situation, you can tell me this is totally wrong, Dina, and then I'll screw up the whole podcast. But something practical I do in this situation is when a kid is mad because a judge has made a decision or a guardian ad litem has made a decision or a social worker has made a decision or a parent hasn't shown up, even with the littlest kids, I suggest we write them a letter and tell them what we feel. And we may not mail that letter, but for the kid, just getting it out helps. Like yesterday when my kid didn't get to go to her visit, we made her mom a card because her mom was dealing with sick people and that was why she couldn't come see. So we made a card for the sick people, you know, and that helped a lot.
It's brilliant because so often what we want to do is contain emotion and get it down because it's too much for us. And our kids pick up on that. We start getting overwhelmed by their big emotions. We can't contain their big emotions. They know they can't contain their big emotions. Nobody's there to hold their big emotions. And so where does it go? It just feels chaotic. When we go, you know what? These emotions have a place. Let's put them where they belong. Let's put words to them. Dan Siegel is like a forerunning neuroscientist in the country, and he looks at kid and adolescent brains, but adults too. And he says for all of us, we have to name it to tame it. You have to be able to put emotion words to what you're feeling for them to calm down. It's almost like magic. And I'll tell you this, when I would have a kid who was from about 5 and up, when one of my kids was tantruming, one of them it worked better with than the other, I will tell you this, but when they were kind of tantruming and the emotions were everywhere and, you know, it was kind of like the crying, you know, because they didn't get something and it would change into this other random cry. And sometimes that would be grief and sometimes it would just be mad, you know, that they're not getting what they, all kinds of stuff, but it just keeps going. It's not really about the moment anymore. And one of the things that I would do is I would stop and I would say, we need words for this. Got to have words for this. And I would quit feeling exhausted and exasperated with the fact they're still wailing, they're still, you know, tantruming. And we would say, all right, got to find the words. And they're 5 or 6, they can't think abstractly about it. So I would start making them try them on. Let's try this one on. I feel discouraged. Say it. Say it. I feel discouraged. Nope, that's not it. Because what you'll find is a lot of times they hit the word, the emotions, the big emotions will stop. It's crazy sometimes how that works. When they feel, I feel disappointed in myself. I feel disappointed in myself. And when they have words to it, it's like a miracle.
I did that on a much less helpful extent with my youngest child. When she cries, I'm like, are you sad or are you mad? Why are you sad? Why? Because if she could just categorize it into sad or mad, then we can go from there. And that seems to help a lot.
I've done that too, but the advocate in me loves the letter idea. And honestly, I would mail it.
I do sometimes. It depends on how.
Even if it was to a fake address, because it empowers the kid that they get to have.
Oh no, I tell them I'm mailing it. I don't not mail it in front of them, but
yeah. I mean, I would even let them, you know, because it, and you can say judges don't respond to letters. You know, I mean, I send letters to people in Congress all the time. They don't respond. You know, that's reality. But you have the power to have a voice. You get to tell them what you think.
And actually, I do that with myself as well. When I went through a horrible relationship, and there was some abuse, and I went through DVP proceedings. And at one point, the judge wouldn't grant me a DVP because he said my husband wasn't a threat. And then a week later, my husband did something to someone else and he locked him up for like a year. And it was kind of like, I wrote him a letter that I still have not mailed and I will never mail because I appear in front of this judge regularly. But it made me feel better to write the letter telling him exactly how it felt to be in his courtroom as a victim and to feel like my voice wasn't being heard.
And to even give our kids the option, because the truth is we don't really have to, we have to avoid the tendency to want to make something different for them than what it is. Like, Stacey, it's great that you were able to put something in writing and not mail it. We do that in therapy all the time with people. We have them write down things, or we'll use techniques where they speak to someone who they would never either be able to because they're dead, someone who abused them in the past, or because it's not safe and they don't want to ever see the person again. And we create ways for them to get the stuff out and put it into words, whether the point is not whether it goes to the other person or not. It's not for them anyway. It's
Right.
for us. And we can wrap that for our kids too. I also love to share these types of tools. It's a feeling wheel. This is through the Gottman Institute. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
This is through the Gottman Institute, and it is a fantastic feeling wheel that you also can find feeling wheels or feeling charts for kids that have more kid-friendly language. But it gets to kind of some of what we would consider root emotions. You see that, Stacy: sad, mad, scared, joyful, powerful, and peaceful. And those are things that I would even use with kids. But then as kids get older too, they can get more specific with how they're feeling. And the more specific they can get, the more helpful it is. By the time my daughter was about 9 or 10, she'd asked to see this chart. She would say, can you get the wheel out? Because I don't know what I'm feeling right now. And she would want to look at it and kind of map it out. But it gave her a sense of control over her own emotions. It gave her a sense of ownership and power in the situation where otherwise big emotions just feel like they are taking over. And so we start to think differently about the circumstances we're dealing with. It's not just my kid's throwing tantrums. What do I do to get them to stop having a tantrum? And we're not just dealing with the behavior of tantrums. You have to dig a little deeper and get into the why. Is a kid throwing a tantrum because they really are, at an egocentric stage? They want what they want and they're not getting it? Or are they sensory overloaded and they can't put words to what's going on inside? You would handle those things pretty differently if you wanted a long-term change. If all we use are short-term in the moment changes to get them to stop tantruming, the stuff that's going on to make those tantrums happen will keep happening. It will come out in a different way. And the older they get, if we don't deal with some of the root issues, then it starts coming out in ways that are even more damaging, right? And come with greater consequences.
So can we take a minute and talk? I know we probably are running long here, but talk about kind of the elephant in the room in foster care, which is the kid who's older usually and has really extreme challenging behaviors. And how do you deal with that as the caregiver, short of send them to a residential facility, which very often isn't helpful and can even make things worse? I mean, sometimes there are kids who need inpatient treatment for a period of time, but it's not the answer to everything. So how do we help parents and caregivers know how to, or what are some strategies that you can use when you can't pick them up and hold them and help them, regulate or in those kinds of ways? And especially when they're already in the tantrum, for lack of a better word.
I have some very practical things that I suggest to start. One, if you are the parent of a teen who is very difficult and you are not in counseling, it's not going to work well, period. You need someone to be listening to what your experience is in it and helping you sort it out. What belongs to the kid, what belongs to you, and help you regularly sort through that. Just like if someone is going through a difficult divorce with someone who is erratic and not making good choices, you need someone to help you sort this out. That's not a failure, not an issue. You need that. So that's one of the first things that I would say is we have to have support as parents. I also would highly suggest having a mentor parent who has raised teenagers before and they are done, who can give you context and say, oh my gosh, this is how bad it got at one point. We were threatening to kick our kid out. And now, he's married and has 3 children and he's in, the military and they're doing great. And you can see response and differences in here's how bad it got at times, so that you can anchor on other sides that the outcomes that it looks like they're not the only ones coming. And then when you get down to practical things, dealing with issues and big problems with big emotions is never the right answer. With teenagers and with other adults, we say this all the time. If people's nervous systems are reacting in the moment, one of the easiest ways to know is if your heart rate's over 100, no productive communication will come out of that situation ever in any circumstance for any reason. Don't do it. And so I would say that you have to set up some ground rules for communication, and teenagers are great to work with you on this because they want it to. Teenagers are still very much kids that want boundaries and need boundaries, but you have to submit to boundaries too as a parent and as an adult. And that's hard because it's a shift out of me creating all of the structure to us creating structure that I have to obey as well.
Mhm.
And when we create these guidelines of how does your kid get to take a break from the discussion in a respectful manner, in a way that keeps them from completely dysregulating and blowing it up, and then holding them accountable for doing that, not keeping them in a conversation, even if you have to stop 12 times for them to regulate and come back. You stop the conversation, they stop the conversation. You do not have any interactions where people aren't regulated. Now, we'll screw this up all the time. You're gonna realize we're both dysregulated after you've already been yelling for a few minutes or whatever else, and then you stop and go, oh my gosh, this is not productive. And we go back to, I'm not doing a good job here, neither are you. We need a break. Take a break, go sit, lay on your bed, take some deep breaths. I'm gonna do the same thing in here because we both need to regulate. We'll come back to this, we're gonna figure it out. And you begin to look at the style that you work with the teenagers like you would with another adult. Not that you don't, it's not that you have the same, little responsibility, of more responsibility for a teenager, but if you're not engaging with them like they are equally a part of the solution, like you would another adult, they are just going to tap out of that conversation. So it comes with letting everybody calm down and making plans and saying, this isn't working. Tell me how we're going to fix this. And requiring that they stay in and build the plans, but outside of the emotions of it all, giving feedback on what they need or what they have, and then just consistent consequences to come along with it. They may act like they don't care. They may act like it's no big deal. My kids had told me before they were glad for the consequences. I'm kind of glad I had to go to bed early this whole week. I've been so tired. I probably would have anyway. That's a lie. Whatever.
My son
But you
does that
don't,
all the time.
yeah, you don't let that move you. You know that they're chomping on it. They're telling you that they're chomping on it. They're trying to create it in a different way, in a different spin. But you be present and do life alongside of them and carry it out. And here are the last two pieces of advice. And this is, I tell you what, this is with all kids' ages, but especially with teenagers. One, if you're not going to follow through on rules, do not make them. Do not have fake rules in your house because it ruins everything. You have to get real about what you actually care about and what you don't. If you're not going to discipline it, if you're not going to hold consequences for it, don't even act like it's a rule in your house. Just be the person who doesn't have that rule. If you're not going to give your kids consequences for throwing their clothes all over the place and not cleaning up their rooms regularly, don't yell at them to clean up their rooms all the time and pick up their clothes. Let it go and let yourself go from that too. Decide if it's important or not, and let the stuff go that's not important to you. You have to really get clear on what is, and then you have to follow through and stay consistent on everything that you tell them is important. And so it's not necessarily that the clothes or the room is or isn't important. It's that you have to really decide if it is to you. You cannot be inconsistent or incongruent with a teenager, trauma background or no. You lose it when that's the case. And then you have to realize that they're on the verge of this being their own life. And the best that you can do is to help guide them into making the best decisions for themselves and keeping them as active participants in the solution, not just a sounding board for the problems. Lecturing and yelling doesn't work for change. You've got to be in an active process of building solution-based interventions. And they're not specific ones necessarily. The kid has to be part of making them. They have to say, I think this would work. Maybe this would work. Maybe I need a tutor. Maybe I need to do less things. Maybe this. And moving forward from there.
Yeah, I think that customizing to the kid is really important. I thinking of a conversation I had recently with a parent who had a child who, and it wasn't even tantruming. It was this child was getting up in the middle of the night and doing things, destroying things in the home, doing things to in other kids' rooms, things like that. So it wasn't that she was in a rage or she was, highly emotional. It was a behavior. And the parent said to me, and it was a foster parent, she said, this child at age 7 or something like that slept in my room on her own bed for a year. Now, typically that's not allowed in foster care. The guardian ad litem had to get special, but pushed for special permission for that. And that helped to address the issue because she said it was the only way I could know she wasn't getting up, or I could get up if she got up. And it's those kinds of customized to the child making the system flex around what the child needs, as opposed to, well, these are the three things that you can do, and if they don't work, then we'll put them in a residential, or we'll do, but customizing it around what, and that it would be a different solution for some other kid. Oh, you're muted, Dina.
The best thing that a residential treatment center can do is to give the family a break. It's literally the only real thing that it can do long term. There can be some skills built, but if you take a kid out of an RTC and put them back in a home without the home having changed while they're gone, nothing changes.
Yep.
And so anytime a parent is at a place, and here's the thing, and I'm not anti-RTCs, they are gifts and blessings at times, but anytime a family reaches a point where they feel like they need to put their kids somewhere for a little while or a long while, I am really clear with them if I'm part of the process to say, you have as much work to do here while they're gone as they're doing there. And if you just use this as a break and a vacation, you just go back to what it was when they come home. But you have to be building new structure in place too, because this is a family system problem, right?
Yeah. And I think that's so important to say, because I think that the perception of most parents, foster parents and probably bio too, is if I send this kid to this place, they're supposed to get intensive treatment and it's supposed to fix it. And so when they come back to me, they should be better. And we shouldn't be having these problems, as opposed to I have to do my own work. And this isn't, I have yet to see of any residential facility that fixed the problem. The putting the kid there made it that much better. It might give you a break. They might learn a few skills. They might, gain some new perspective or something, but it's not going to it's not a overnight or over month fix, it's not just going to happen.
You're so right. And this is something I laugh about, but it's as true as can be when people are talking about fostering or adopting. But even when people just have difficult kids and they're asking me about parenting, my best advice for parenting, I always say, if it goes through your mind that you think you might need to take your kid to get help somewhere, you need to go first. Anytime it would cross my mind, like, I don't think we're doing well, I think that we might need some help, I went and got help. You know what? 90% of the time it fixed it. It was me and my management issues and my stuff that was coming into play that somehow helped remanage. And that can be really difficult, because if we have egos associated with it, it can feel really bad to say it might be me and not just them, and not just trauma and not just whatever. But at the same time, it is so empowering, because if I am carrying a significant portion of the problem, then I have control over a lot of the problem, and I can fix things that are contributing to the problem, and it is going to change our whole system in and of itself. Yeah. I think we did go a little bit long on this one, but I think it was worth it. I think we'll close this episode down, but we can continue talking about discipline too, I think, because it gets into so many other areas of parenting. And I really appreciate you guys being in this with real scenarios and with things that we all deal with, right? All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening, and we'll be back again with more episodes coming soon.